I'm back. Welcome to the Art of Life podcast. I know I've been on a long hiatus. We're going to get into that, but I'm back posting every week, and I appreciate each and every one of you who reached out because you noticed I disappeared. I've been off all social for a few months. We're going to get into that because some extenuating circumstances came up, and we're going to get into, what I learned. So it's not a surprise. You guys have been listening to the podcast. I've been dealing with health issues my whole life. I've been battling my health my whole life. Now, last update, I believe I was in Mexico. I was doing my thing, but the thing is about myself is I hyper focus, and I've been having these projects and these goals that I've been so excited about that I didn't notice my health slowly declining. And what it was I'm used to feeling relatively like unwell. I'm used to having episodes of things happening. And so hindsight's 2020, and I think if I was a little bit more in tune to the present moment instead of just head down, bite your mouth guard, pursue my goals, I would have noticed sooner. The last few months I've been in and out of the hospital. I've spent a lot of time bedridden. I've spent a lot of time just trying to get back to baseline. And I'm going to break down kind of what happened and what I learned from it all and where I'm at now and what direction I'm going to be moving forward with. So basically, I was in Mexico for a few months doing my thing, coaching, but I didn't really get into anything else other than, coaching and private lessons because I was so tired. And on top of that, I had quite a few, I got like 6 or 7 staph infections in the span of those months. It's not like there was an outbreak at the gym. For those that don't know, staph is a bacteria that lives on our skin that when it gets into your body can be pretty detrimental. And, excuse me, it's very common in grappling sports, jiu-jitsu, wrestling. And if a gym has an outbreak, usually a lot of people get it. I was the only one at the gym that got it. And I guess what was happening is I was dealing with this and my immune system was so fried that the staph on my own skin was, causing me problems. My last week in Mexico, I remember before this, people were like, you don't look right. Like your color's off, you seem tired. But my last week, I was having crazy fevers, like I couldn't walk straight. Like they would come and go. The mornings were always better. But as the afternoon and evening came, like I couldn't get out of bed. I was dizzy. I was unwell. And I was just having a really hard time. And I was wondering, is this serious? Because this could be very serious. And it could be something that, passes by. I've had episodes of things similar to this. And that was like the struggle of coming back. Because I'm working on a few projects. And the weekend right before I left urgently. Like on a Wednesday, I decided to leave. I caught a flight on Thursday to get back to get taken care of, but the project I'm working on involves Mexico, and that weekend I was going to do a bunch of stuff for that project. And it came down to the fact that I was teaching class, like sitting down, feeling terrible, everyone telling me I look terrible, and it got to the point where I'm like, okay, I need to get to my medical system. Like, say what you will about Canada, we have good health care in urgencies like this. And something I did that was pretty ignorant, so I have Crohn's. I get medication for Crohn's. It's an IV medication, so you can't really travel with it. It's very difficult to do. And I'm supposed to get it every 8 weeks. But I've been feeling so well, and I thought, like, I hear stories about people dealing with diet, managing their health with diet. So I just told myself, in Mexico, I'm just going to eat super clean. I'm going to train really hard, and I can miss it by, a month or two. And so I started having those fevers. I started having symptoms of my Crohn's flaring. And so what I did was I need that medication. So I flew back on Thursday, and then Friday morning got the medication. Friday night I still had like a terrible fever. And one thing about myself is I just like don't like waiting. I didn't want to wait in the hospital. The hospital waits are supposed to be super long because there's so many people and our system's so back up. But what happens when you go to a hospital, they run you through triage. They want to know why you're there. And from there they give you a priority. So So what happened was I went to triage. They didn't even move me back to the waiting room. They immediately moved me into a room in Emerge. The doctors came in right away. My fever was super high, and they started treating me. I eventually got moved up to a floor. I started feeling better, so I made a post on Instagram to reset the algorithm. I knew it would get a lot of engagement, not realizing there was something else that was wrong with me. So, they did all the usual X-ray, CT scan, and the first thing they said, they were like, oh, like your bowels look normal, which is what the Crohn's would attack, but there's something in like one of your lungs. I was like, but I don't know, there shouldn't be anything. My lungs are fine. And then the fevers came back and I started feeling super unwell. So they ended up doing bronx, which is a tube that goes into your lungs, and then they flushed it with like saline. So it's water, salt water. They run it through the lung, they suck it back up, and they test it. And they did the same with a biopsy the following day because they were just very, very desperate to figure out what was wrong with me because my fever was so high. I was feeling so unwell. I was losing weight very quickly. And I'm very lucky, like, I got a diagnosis, which was a histoplasmosis. It's basically a fungus infection. So I must have inhaled a fungus, and it started to make sense because I'd been so run down since January, and I'd been so convinced that this is just what it feels like when you're an entrepreneur. This is just what it feels like when you're putting 100-hour weeks in and you have all these projects and goals, and that I can push, 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 and then I can take a rest once, you push it in motion, kind of pushing like a boulder off a hill. But yeah, basically, they tested me for histo. They started treating the histo. They sent me out of the hospital. They were seeing me as an outpatient, and they were testing. Histo is hard to grow. It's hard to detect. And the reason they were able to detect it was because I'm immunocompromised. So they did a blood sample and a urine sample. And this was like Canada long weekend. Right before the weekend, I went into the hospital for an outpatient appointment, which means I'm not staying in the hospital, but I'm being seen in the hospital. And I told them, my one doctor's like, hey man, like, I think you should probably stay. And what was interesting to me is he was like a young and up and coming hungry doctor who, as I talked to him, he looked at me as like a problem to be solved or a case, or like he said like an episode of House. And so he's calling doctors in Mexico trying to figure out what's wrong with me. He was the one that really pushed to figure it out when no one knew what was wrong. But he told me, he's like, I think you should come back to the hospital. And my whole thing was, on the weekend it's hard to see doctors. It's a long weekend on top of that, and I'm more comfortable at home, which he like acknowledged. He's like, yeah, I see your point, I'm like, I'll come back on Tuesday and we can figure something out. They want to start treatments, IV treatment for the medication. And then he calls me the next day and he goes, yeah, so your urine came back positive and your blood came back positive, which means this isn't just in your lung anymore. This has gone fully systemic. Like, we need to run a harder drug. Now, this drug, like a lot of powerful medications, is really hard on your body. Specifically, this one was hard on my kidneys, and I already have somewhat injured kidneys. So the doctors were kind of like, okay, we need to do your blood work before and after the medicine, and we're going to give you as long as we can. We want to do 2 weeks, but you can't push the kidneys too far. When you push the kidneys too far, you lose them. So they were very careful. They wanted to do 2 weeks. I ended up doing 5 days of this medication, but it really was the thing that like started moving me in the right direction. And then they stopped the medication, they discharged me, and that sounded like, I'm on the path to recovery. The thing about recovery when it comes to most things, but specifically your health, is it's not linear. There are days where I feel way better. There are days where I feel awful, and like, it's such an interesting thing where like you can't be attached to the outcome. You really have to take it day by day, because I made the mistake of thinking like, oh my God, I feel great, the rest is going to be a breeze. And then something's going to happen. Something's going to come up. I have to sit in the perspective of, oh my God, I just came out of this severe illness and injury, right? And it didn't hit me till I ended up seeing the lung specialist. And this was kind of a fluke. Once they figured out what I was doing, I didn't necessarily need to see a lung specialist, but when they didn't know what was wrong, they made this appointment. And so before you go into the lung specialist, they do a test, which is like you blow and they test your lung capacity. And when I finally met with the doctor, he looked at the results and he's like, wow. He goes, you have a high range of normal function. I was like, oh, that's like kind of what I would expect. He goes, no, you don't understand. Like, you have fungus in your lungs. Like, he's like, I can't imagine what it would have been like before. He's like, to be honest, we were all kind of baffled that a transplant patient that's immunocompromised wasn't in ICU or down for longer. It felt like I was down forever for me, but they said down for longer. And what he said, he's like, it's how good a shape you were in coming in. And that's like such a superpower. We're going to do a whole episode on the superpowers that we have and the ones we can build and how they serve us in life. But being fit in this case, like, is something that could have probably saved my life, or at least made this recovery much easier. Now, I spent a lot of time in the hospital, and I spent a lot of time in solitude. And what I learned through this, because when I left to Mexico, I don't know if I said this on the podcast, I'm like, I'm doing this direction, and if this doesn't take off, this is like my last go before I take a break. And so I had to sit with that while I'm in the hospital, knowing how close I was, and contemplating and realizing that like this solitude that I was so scared of for so many years was so powerful. It's steroids for creativity. There's no one around to talk to. You kind of talk to yourself. You kind of start to ponder things yourself. And making time to be bored was really important in me kind of figuring some things out, right? Like my weight fluctuated so much. So I came back from Mexico like 165. As much as I was run down, I was really fit. I could do, after some breath work, I could do sets of 70 push-ups. I could do sets of 12, you know, stop and go pull-ups. And I went from that to 139 pounds. I live in a basement suite. If I would go up the stairs, I'd have to take a break because I was out of breath. And that was one of the hardest things of this. It's not, which I hear is funny to say, but I've been used to feeling unwell. But that was like an identity crisis for myself. And it might not apply for you as far as like health, but everyone identifies with certain things. I am this. And that went away. I wasn't fit in that time. You know, I wasn't a fighter as a martial artist. I was all these things that to me were such a powerful part of my identity. I had to let go, and I had to also look at like, what if this is just me now? What if this is just, you know, and I think that's what people go through at a much higher degree when they end up with a life-altering injury, right? Like people who get amputated or end up paralyzed or deal with things that will make them never the same. And it starts to challenge their identity. And if you guys listen to the 2-hour-long episode, I said something that I think is my quote. It might have been something I heard and repeated, but I think it's mine. It's, when everything falls apart, you look for what's left. And I think it's a powerful way to look at anyone who's struggling and what's not around anymore. You have to look for what's left. And what was left was like all the things that I am outside of my physicality. And the podcast was something I missed. You know, the podcast is not my physicality. The podcast is the lessons I've learned through this like difficult life I've been so blessed to live. And I noticed when I was like in the hospital too, like this is very much the life that I asked for. When I was a kid, I used to watch cartoons and identify with the kid who went through the stuff. I used to almost be resentful that I didn't go through anything because I didn't think I could develop character otherwise. And like, boy, be careful what you wish for. Because, I mean, shit hit the fan real hard and real fast and shit was everywhere. And it developed a lot of character, but it was very, very painful. And I think you can acquire that knowledge without requiring yourself to go through that pain. Something else is I realized, like I talked about at the beginning of the episode, I'm just not present enough in my day-to-day life. I was so hyper-focused. You know, this didn't have to happen. I didn't have to get so bad. Like before I left Mexico, I had 3 nights of high fever. And I truly believe I've had this since January. It's a fungus that's pretty common in Mexico. I think I caught it last time I was there. And my immune system's been fighting it, and I've slowly felt worse and worse and just been like, I'm tired, I'm not sleeping enough because of work. It's fine, I'm going to get there, I'm going to get my rest. Not realizing that, like, rest is productive. Rest is extremely productive. And it's a thing that we all need, and we have to stop shaming ourselves. I don't know. I know for myself and a lot of my peers, we shame ourselves for needing rest, but slowing down and being present. Because I'm not present in my life. Oh, I am more now, but I wasn't being present. Unless I was like sparring or rolling where someone's trying to kill me and I have no choice but to be present, which is probably why I love it so much. I wasn't here. I'd always be rushing to the next thing. I'd always feel like I was in a rush, even though there's nothing to do, right? Because there's always something to do. Someone would be talking to me and I was having a good time in that conversation. Like, oh, I got to go because I have to finish this today. And setting such high expectations for my to-do list for the day and not accepting any less from me, not realizing I was hurting myself. It's just been such a wild few months that as I'm talking into the mic and discussing all this, it's kind of hitting me that this was a good thing. It was a painful thing. It was a good thing. It was something I need to remember because human nature takes things for granted. You know, I've gone through all these things with my health. I've gone through 2 liver transplants and tons of surgeries and tons of procedures. And, you know, I've even been told I had 6 months to live. And I'm not always grateful for the health that I have. And it's so easy to start to take things for granted. It's human nature. And you get into a cycle, you get into a goal, and you're looking to the future. And I think, you know, that famous stop and smell the roses. You know, like to slow down is really a beautiful way to live life. Because the way I was living life before this, yeah, it looked exciting. It sounded exciting. I was, really on a path of my dreams, not realizing I wasn't enjoying it because I was always preoccupied running to the next thing. And that's something I want to talk about here, and I want to remind myself constantly, constantly. Like, don't take things for granted. Be present. Everything can go away. And I'm saying this to you guys because hopefully you don't have to end up in the hospital to learn that same lesson. I'm just going through my list. I wrote down when I run these podcasts, usually I kind of like write out stuff, or if there's research backing my stuff, I quote it. But this is very much a personal thing. So I wrote down things I really wanted to talk about, and I just want to make sure I hit them all. The last thing is like understanding your situation. I didn't understand how dire my situation was until I was kind of through it, and the doctor told me like you should be in ICU. Fitness saved your life. Being fit saved your life. And there's positivity to that, because if you think you're gonna die, it's very easy to give up. If you think you just like this is just like something I got to go through, I'm gonna keep showing up, I'm gonna keep going. I have stuff to get to do. A lot of times, I remember the first time I had this realization was like I was working, and someone just didn't show up for their shift, and I was like, "What do you mean they didn't show up for your shift?" It like never crossed my mind that I could even do that. And so, just like understanding what you're willing to allow yourself to do, and I wasn't gonna let this take me out. I might let it slow me down. I might let it defer me off my path for a while. But I love what I'm doing. I love martial arts. I love sharing with you guys. I love inspiring and empowering people. And that's always going to be my mission. And if I divert for a while and come back, which is not related to the podcast, I'm still committed to 52 episodes. We just took a little break. But yeah, I feel a little bit rusty on the microphone. I filmed some content today. I filmed a little bit rusty behind the camera, but it's going to keep coming. It's going to keep getting better. If you got this far in the episode, I appreciate you very, very much. And as always, ending with a quote, one that I need right now is that nature never rushes, but it always gets it done. And inherently being a being of this planet, we are nature. Don't forget it. I love you guys all. Keep tuning in, keep showing up. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Cheers.